Just half a mile away from the airport, Otis Redding tragically lost his life in a horrifying plane accident, freezing to death in cold waters. Everybody saw something was wrong with the plane, but he didn't listen.
The plane had crashed and they didn't think that there were any survivors.
You can only just imagine what would have been coming from him in the future had he lived.
What would later come to light about the last minutes of his life shocked everybody.
Sitting in the morning sun.
Otis Redding's beginnings. Just days after recording The Dock of the Bay, news broke out about the talented, then 26-year-old Otis Redding that he tragically lost his life when his plane crashed in Wisconsin, along with 4 members of his band. The song was released the following month and quickly rose to the top of the charts. It made history as the first song to reach #1 in the U.S. after the artist's death.
What you want, honey, you got it. What you need, baby, you got it. All that next thing.
In 1967, Otis Redding was experiencing a meteoric rise to fame. He had just finished a successful tour of Europe with Stax Records, which had introduced his soulful music to a wider audience. His performance at California's Monterey Pop Festival had also made a significant impact, garnering him even more fans. Otis was becoming a household name, winning over both the mainstream market and the loyal fans of soul music who had always supported him. His unique voice and heartfelt performances had touched many, making his sudden death all the more heartbreaking for the music world.
I didn't hurt that much when my father died, or my mother died, or my brothers died.
Although Otis Redding's life and promising career were cut short, his music continued to gain worldwide fame. Today, he is still celebrated as the Crown Prince of Soul by millions of fans around the globe. But before we dive into how the accident happened, and for those who don't know who he is, let's take a look at his early life. Otis Ray Redding Jr. was born in Dawson, Georgia, on September 9, 1941, as one of 6 children in a poor sharecropper family. When Otis was a toddler, his family moved to a housing project in Macon, where he quickly developed a love for music and learned to play the guitar, piano, and drums. By 1960, Otis Redding was eager to explore new opportunities. He moved to Los Angeles, where he recorded his first singles and eventually signed a contract with Stax Records. This marked the beginning of a series of hits, including songs like These Arms of Mine and Try a Little Tenderness. During this period, Redding also wrote and recorded Respect, a song that would later become iconic when performed by Aretha Franklin. Alongside his flourishing music career, Otis was dedicated to his family. He married Zelma Atwood in 1961, and together they had 3 children. Redding and Zelma met in 1959 at a local event called the Teenage Party in Macon, Georgia. Otis, who was 18 at the time, was already known for his incredible voice. He attended the party with his friends, looking forward to dancing and socializing. Zelma, a cheerful 17-year-old, was at the same event with her girlfriends. Her infectious laughter and striking beauty caught Otis's eye almost immediately. He felt drawn to her and decided to approach her. With his heart racing, Otis introduced himself to Zelma and asked her to dance. She accepted with a warm smile, and they spent the evening dancing and talking. They discovered a shared love for music and felt an instant connection. By the end of the night, Otis and Zelma knew they had found something special. They promised to see each other again and began spending more time together, deepening their bond. That chance meeting at the teenage party marked the start of their enduring love story, which would flourish as Otis's musical career took off. Redding's journey to becoming a legendary soul singer began in his hometown of Macon, Georgia. He regularly competed in talent shows at the Douglas Theater, winning the $5 prize 15 times in a row. His dominance was so overwhelming, that he was eventually barred from competing to give other performers a chance. During this period, Otis started performing with the Upsetters, Little Richard's former band, and occasionally with Johnny Jenkins and the Pine Toppers, a local group. In October 1962, Otis's big break came unexpectedly. He was driving Johnny Jenkins and the band to Memphis for a recording session at Stax Records because Jenkins didn't have a driver's license. Otis wasn't scheduled to perform that day. As the session wrapped up and everyone prepared to leave, someone suggested Otis should sing. He took the chance and delivered a heartfelt rendition of "These Arms of Mine." Jim Stewart, the co-founder of Stax Records, was so impressed that he recorded the song on the spot. This spontaneous performance marked the beginning of Otis Redding's illustrious career in soul music, changing the landscape of the genre forever. Despite his modesty, the rest of the world saw Otis Redding's incredible talent. As his fame grew, he set off on a European tour in the spring of 1967. That June, he performed at the Monterey Pop Festival in California. This concert was a significant moment for Redding as he amazed the mostly white audience with his performance. Up until then, he had mostly performed for black audiences. The Monterey Pop Festival seemed to be the turning point that would propel him to mainstream fame. Sadly, Otis Redding's rising star was tragically cut short. Just 6 months after that landmark performance, he passed away in a plane crash, leaving behind a legacy of music that continues to inspire. In the spring of 1967, the Bar-Kays released their debut single for Stax, "Soul Finger," which reached number 3 on the Billboard R&B charts. Most of the band members were still in high school, yet they quickly became a hit act. Stax Records began grooming them to become the label's second house band alongside Booker T and the MGs. Around this time, Otis Redding, the star of Stax Records, saw the Bar-Kays perform and was impressed by their sound. He approached the band about doing some gigs with him. The band, still in school, initially couldn't commit to weekday performances. Redding offered to pick them up in his plane on Fridays, ensuring they could join him on weekends. Shortly after, in the summer of 1967, the Bar-Kays began their journey backing Otis Redding, starting with a 10-night run at the Apollo Theater in Harlem. They then toured the country, proving to be a perfect musical fit with Redding. Their energetic performances and tireless work ethic made them a powerful team. That fall, Redding took a break from touring to have surgery on his throat and to write and record what would become his final song, "Sittin' On, the Dock of the Bay." By early December, Redding and the Bar-Kays were back on the road, performing weekend gigs at various colleges. They had 3 shows lined up between December 8th and 10, 1967. Most of the group traveled in Redding's new twin-engine Beechcraft plane. Otis Redding bought his Beechcraft H-18 plane from fellow musician James Brown in the 1960s. The aircraft, an 8-seater, was used by Redding for traveling between performances and recording sessions, though it couldn't accommodate his entire band at once. The Beechcraft H-18 had a history of mechanical issues and had been involved in a previous accident. On December 10, 1967, the weather was poor with fog and light snow, making flying particularly risky. The pilot, who was relatively inexperienced with this type of aircraft and unfamiliar with the destination airport, faced significant challenges in landing safely. Their first show of the weekend was at Vanderbilt University in Nashville on Friday. The next night, they performed in Cleveland, Ohio, where they also filmed the TV show Upbeat. Early the next morning, they headed to the airport to fly to Madison, Wisconsin. The plane's cabin was especially cold that morning. One of the Bar-Kays asked an airport attendant to start the plane to warm it up, but the attendant said he couldn't because the battery was low and preferred the pilot to handle it. This concerned the band members, but after a short wait, the plane started up and they took off for Madison without any issues. The weather was rainy and foggy, but pilot Richard Fraser assured Otis Redding that he could get them to Madison safely. Bar-Kays bassist James Alexander, who was tasked with returning the band's rental car in Cleveland, took a commercial flight to Wisconsin. After flying with little rest from the previous night, the passengers soon fell asleep. Musician James Brown later remembered their last conversation. He had warned Otis, "That plane is not big enough to be doing what you're doing. It can't carry all those people and all that equipment. You shouldn't be messing around with it like that." As they neared their destination, just 4 miles from Truex Field in Madison, everything seemed to be going smoothly. At 3:25 p.m., pilot Richard Fraser radioed for permission to land. However, shortly after, tragedy struck. The aircraft began its descent through thick clouds and had to fly over Lake Monona before reaching the airport. As they neared the shore, something went terribly wrong. The engine suddenly sputtered and stopped working. With low visibility due to fog, the pilot had to rely solely on instruments to navigate, assuming they were still functioning correctly. In essence, the pilot was flying blind. An eyewitness on the lakeshore saw the plane flying with its left wing lower than the right before it sharply banked and crashed into the lake about half a mile from land. Ben Cawley, the Bar-Kays trumpet player, had been asleep on the plane. He was jolted awake by his bandmate Phelan Jones, who looked frightened and said, "Oh no," while peering through the window. Remarkably, the aircraft stayed intact upon impact, floating on the icy lake for several minutes, gently bobbing up and down before it slowly began to sink. Unable to swim, Ben clung to the cushion as he watched his friends struggling in the water. Their desperate cries for help echoed across the lake as they succumbed to the cold. Ben remembered seeing Carl Cunningham and Matt Kelly briefly before their cries faded away. Ronnie Caldwell's pleas for help were particularly heartbreaking, but soon the silence of the lake took over. After the crash was reported, rescue teams were quickly alerted and additional help was dispatched following emergency calls from locals. The first responders arrived within minutes at the shore, but the choppy, frigid waters made it difficult to reach the wreckage. As the cold, murky waters of Lake Monona closed in around him, Ben Cawley clung to the remnants of the plane wreckage. The biting December air made every breath a struggle, but sheer willpower and shock kept him alive. Just when Ben thought he couldn't hold on any longer, police officers on a boat found him. Rescue teams arrived, pulling him from the icy grip of the lake and wrapping him in blankets. An officer approached, his face grave and his voice somber. "You're lucky to be alive," he said, placing a reassuring hand on Ben's shoulder. Confused and aching all over, Ben looked up, his eyes searching the officer's face for answers. "Why?" Ben managed to whisper through chattering teeth, the weight of dread settling over him. The officer took a deep breath, his expression heavy with sorrow. "Everyone else," he said slowly, his words hanging in the cold air. "Everyone else on that plane. They didn't make it." The words hit Ben like a punch to the gut. The realization crashed over him like the freezing waves had moments before. His friends, his bandmates, his brothers in music, they were all gone. The haunting sound of their laughter and music just hours earlier now echoed painfully in his mind. Ben was alive, but his world would never be the same. Despite their swift response, it took the rescue team 17 minutes to reach Ben Cawley. By then, the plane had sunk to the depths of the lake. They were just in time to save Ben, but too late for the others. As fans waited in line at the concert venue, they were shocked by the news of the crash. They went home hoping Otis Redding had somehow survived. Redding's wife, Zelma, also clung to hope. Around 5 p.m., she received a call from the Madison coroner, who described a body recovered from the lake as a tall, dark-skinned man wearing a black undershirt. This description was likely of Jimmy King, still unidentified at that time. Meanwhile, the wreckage had settled at the lake's 40-foot depths. The plane was in a 45-degree angle, with its nose buried deep in the silt, its body twisted and torn open, missing its left wing and engine. The divers faced harsh and dangerous conditions as they continued their search for hours. The following morning, when the rescue mission resumed, a horrifying discovery was made. Otis Redding was found still buckled into his seat. Otis had died at the age of 26 and was survived by his wife Zelma and their 3 children, Dexter, Carla, and Otis Jr. Sadly, James Brown's concerns proved true. Just 4 miles from the Madison airport, Otis Redding's plane crashed into Lake Monona. This tragic event marked the untimely end of a promising life and career, leaving the world to mourn the loss of a musical legend. But the authorities were unsure what the real reasons were. Could it be Otis Redding himself? The fact that the aircraft was found laterally aligned with the runway centerline further casts doubt on the theories of mechanical failure or an instrument malfunction due to a weak battery, as speculated in media reports following the crash. One key missing piece of information is the altitude at which Fraser began his approach. When crossing the outer marker, the glide slope functions like a long stairway banister ending at the runway. This glide slope dictates a descent rate of 700 feet per minute, and professional standards require aborting the approach if that rate exceeds 1,000 feet per minute. If Fraser was flying a non-precision approach, sometimes called a localizer approach, without glide slope or vertical guidance due to an outage or lack of proper equipment, he would have had to level off at a preset altitude while maintaining his course until spotting the airport. If Fraser was too high, he might have tried to chase the glide slope, causing him to increase his rate of descent. Similarly, during a non-precision approach, the goal is to reach the minimum descent altitude, MDA, quickly and safely to have more time to locate the airport. In trying to catch the glide slope, or MDA, the increased rate of descent could have contributed to his disorientation. Another factor to consider is a sudden bout of carburetor ice, which could have led to a balky engine or engines. While Ben Cawley, the sole survivor, reported a tailspin confirming disorientation, none of these distractions alone should have caused Fraser to lose control. Adding to the complexity of the situation, there is speculation that Otis Redding, who had been sitting in the co-pilot seat, might have been piloting the plane despite not being fully licensed to fly with passengers. Redding had been taking flying lessons but was not fully certified. Official reports did not conclusively determine if Redding was flying the plane at the time of the crash, but the circumstances and his presence in the co-pilot's seat have fueled ongoing debate and speculation. This possibility, coupled with the overweight of the malfunctioning aircraft, poor weather conditions, Fraser's relative inexperience with the aircraft, and potential disorientation from either trying to chase the glide slope or dealing with a non-precision approach, creates a multifaceted scenario that led to the tragic crash. His tragic accident became part of a sorrowful list of music history's air disasters, which includes the losses of Lynyrd Skynyrd, John Denver, and Aaliyah. Would you like me to cover their horrifying stories as well? Leave me a comment below. The early death of Redding cut short a brilliant career, leaving behind a legacy of music and a poignant reminder of the fragility of life. Today, Otis Redding's song "Sittin' On the Dock of the Bay" holds a special place in music history, ranking number 38 on Rolling Stone's list of the 500 greatest songs of all time. His other iconic song, "Respect," which he wrote, is ranked number 1. In 2007, Redding's widow, Zelma, established the Otis Redding Foundation. This nonprofit organization is dedicated to offering music and arts education to young people in Macon, Georgia, keeping Otis Redding's legacy alive through the next generation. Unfortunately, we can only wonder how far Otis Redding's career might have soared if he had not met his untimely end in the icy waters of Lake Monona. As Jeff Coleth, the executive director of the Stax Museum of American Soul Music, reflected to the Wisconsin State Journal, it wasn't just that the plane went down in Madison, it was a career at a meteoric rise cut short. Sometimes, when Ben Cawley sleeps, he still hears the cries of his friends and bandmates. In his dreams, he feels the icy rush of the lake's water, the chill of fear, and the helplessness and hurt that followed. When these moments come alone in the darkness, he tries to think of the music they made together. He tries to remember the sweet sounds of soul and Stax, the things that have kept him going all these years. The crash claimed 8 lives, including Stax record star Otis Redding, and Cawley's Bar-Kays bandmates Phelan Jones, Carl Cunningham, Jimmy King, and Ronnie Caldwell. But more than just a survivor of a plane crash, Cawley represents both the triumph and tragedy of the Stax Records legacy. He became a living symbol of their enduring spirit, and the music that has touched so many lives. Born in 1947, Colley found his musical roots as a child at the New Friendship Baptist Church, where he and his mother sang in the choir. Colley began playing the trumpet in the 7th grade. He soon connected with neighborhood kids and students from Booker T. Washington High School, including guitarist Jimmy King, saxophonist Phelan Jones, drummer Carl Cunningham, keyboardist Ronnie Caldwell, and bassist James Alexander. They formed a group called the Imperials, later renaming themselves the Bar-Kays. After months of shock and mourning, Ben Colley and James Alexander decided to try to rebuild their lives by reforming the band. In 1968, the new Bar-Kays debuted and found success, recording at Stax Records and touring with groups like The Temptations. However, by 1972, Colley, who had a growing family, left the band because he didn't feel comfortable being away on the road all the time. Despite the painful memories, Colley continued to work and perform. His trumpet was in high demand for recording sessions in Memphis, Muscle Shoals, and Nashville. As the years went by, more sadness came to Stax Records. The company went bankrupt in 1975, and in 1989, the studio was demolished. On that day, Colley stood outside playing a solemn tune on his trumpet as a farewell. In 1989, Ben Colley faced another life-threatening challenge when he suffered an aneurysm and a massive stroke. He had to relearn basic skills like reading, writing, walking, dressing himself, and eating. Doctors told him he would never play the trumpet again. Despite his stroke, he still wanted to perform. But his mobility issues made touring difficult. His friend David Porter helped him by setting up performances at Dave Blues Restaurant inside the Memphis International Airport. In 2007, nearly 18 years ago, Ben Colley made a significant visit to Madison, returning to the site of the plane crash that changed his life. This was a year of poignant milestones for Colley: the 40th anniversary of the crash, the 50th anniversary of Stax's founding, and his 60th birthday, which his family celebrated with a surprise party in October. Despite recovering mostly from his stroke, with only occasional speech difficulties, Colley remained a vital presence at the Stax Museum of American Soul, participating in ceremonial functions and contributing to the museum's School for Children. He took part in a ceremony at Monona Terrace by the lake, honoring Otis Redding and the fallen Bar-Kays. Dressed in a black suit, Colley expressed his honor in remembering his friends, playing the trumpet and singing heartfelt renditions of Redding's "Try a Little Tenderness" and "Sittin' On," "The Dock of the Bay." Sadly, Ben Colley passed away in 2015, but his legacy and the memory of that emotional return to Madison in 2007 continue to resonate with those who knew and admired him. This was the tragic story of how Otis Redding lost his life. Do you think that this crash could have been avoided? Which of his songs is your favorite? Share it with us in the comments and leave a like if you enjoyed this mini documentary.